We should be pushing the issue, not the issue that deep energy retrofits are expensive, rather that saving buildings is cheap.
Welcome to the Passive House Podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House Podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Zack Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
And it's post another excellent Reimagine event. Zack, how was it?
Yeah, we had Reimagine Buildings PREFAB last Friday, and it was so much fun. Really great. Three hours plus a bonus hour of a roundtable all about passive prefab with a bunch of pioneers and trailblazers in this space, and the chat was just going off the hook. I mean, we had well over 250 people on the entire time, and just great stories and examples, and I think people came away with some good kind of models they can replicate in their work.
Yeah,
and places to start on the exploring prefab.
Yeah, I jumped in a few times. The event started at 3:30 in the morning my time, so I missed the beginning. But I did catch a few, and yeah, it just looked like there was a lot of chat going on, some really great presentations. One of the things I guess I was concerned about with the event, the content and some of the interviews, is that there's a lot of people learning very similar lessons or presenting similar learning. Was there a common theme, and was there repetition that was good, or is it's sort of building on itself, do you think, the whole role of prefab in passive house world?
I think, I do think that there are some emerging themes that because there are models that are working, that there are some kind of common themes and stories that are coming out. So that in that case, there's some repetition, and I think that basically what is becoming clear is that prefab panels can allow like architects or builders or contractors to do passive house in places where they might not have been able to do it. It may not have been feasible to do it otherwise. Yeah. And so so that's the kind of central theme, that the kind of different circumstances that's really varied. So it could be that so for example, Tessa Bradley of Artisans Group talked about how passive prefab, having prefab panels allows her to work with a much broader range of general contractors, some of whom aren't familiar with passive house yet, because the passive house nature of these panels is baked into the panels, and so then it's a matter of assembling on site, and so there are fewer potential pitfalls, and it's easier to kind of achieve the precision necessary for high performance building. And so that means that she's able to work in new markets where she may not have relationships yet with passive house builders, or she can do more projects in the Pacific Northwest. She's already working with a bunch of great GCs. They get very busy, so they're not available. So that's one example. But another would be Lindsay Shack of Love Shack Architecture, based in Idaho and Wyoming and Montana, right? And she's working. A lot of her clients, she's doing these, gorgeous, amazing second homes for wealthy clients in the mountains. But she's able to figure out, she's able to bring passive house design and construction there to GCs who are not necessarily trained up yet, or maybe even not interested in it in the first place.
Right.
Because they've already got a model that works with these luxury projects.
Yep.
She's able to bring it there because with prefab panels. So that's another example of, it's just a new market. And so that kind of theme of like, this allows us, like, one thing that came up in the survey results of that survey, we sent out that question of what's the biggest hurdle that you're facing in creating low carbon buildings. We sent that to our full community, and we heard back things like, it's hard to find a general contractor who is interested in this, or has the skill set necessarily to do passive house, or it's difficult to get started on my first job, or it's hard to persuade other team members, or it's hard to get the materials that we need to do these. There are all these different issues that where passive house or prefab is a potential solution. Yeah, it's not to say that it works in all cases by any means. Yeah, but it was cool to see that unfold, and I think that's why we saw so much activity in the chat, and and people saying, hey, this is something that I really am now motivated to explore in my own work. So it was great.
That idea of a higher level of performance being sort of baked into system, I think that comes through on today's interview as well. It's something that Tim sort of alluded to in your conversation with him, which we'll get to that because that's another great chat with a previous guest, a well-known name for the show and for the accelerator in general. But before we do that, we've got some people to thank.
Indeed. So I want to thank the fine organizations that support the work that we do here at Passive House Accelerator. So a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Also, thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Minotaur, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stokecorp, and Zola Windows. And a big thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050. And today's episode is part of this special series of episodes focused on prefab for the month of May. And so I want to also thank the sponsors of the Reimagine Buildings Prefab Conference. So that's Collective Carpentry, Quantum Passive House, and Reframe Systems. So a big thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is Tim McDonald, friend of the show, friend of all things Passive House, really, a leader in the field. I think we should just jump straight into it, Zach.
Let's do it. Welcome, Tim McDonald, to the Passive House Podcast. Thanks for joining me, Tim.
My pleasure, Zach.
Yeah, so you probably need no introduction, but I'm going to do a little introduction, and then I'd love for you to also talk a little bit about yourself and your work. But Tim is just a force of nature in the Passive House space. So you've been developing projects, Passive House projects for what, 10 years, maybe longer, starting in Philadelphia? 15 years.
Let me just say one thing. I haven't been. Onion Flats has been.
Good
and
point.
That's great. Gets confused a lot. And I just want to really make the point that my partner Howard and my other partners and everybody in our office, like no joke, like I'm
Yeah.
just the face.
Right. Right. No, good. That's excellent point. Excellent point. So, Onion Flats has been developing these projects and not all, like kind of also developing a market really, or doing it despite the fact that there wasn't really a passive house market, quote unquote. You and others have also been really instrumental in passive house policy. So the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency passed that or adopted a rule in its whole rubric for awarding low-income housing tax credits that provided an incentive for folks to do passive house. And you and Laura Nettleton and others were involved in making that specific policy happen in Pennsylvania, which created this really important pulse of multifamily affordable passive house projects.
Correct.
Yeah. And then you went around the country and shared that model with other of what is that? Housing agencies,
housing finance agencies.
Yeah. Around so state by state, and so there have been similar policies that have been adopted elsewhere. So there's that. Now you're in Boston, and Onion Flats is in Boston, doing a bunch of larger projects in Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, and I'll also just qualify that a little bit. So our development team, our development design build team, is typically referred to as Onion Flats. Our development and our construction company is kind of defunct right now. And so we're really just Onion Flats architecture right now. We're not doing any development other than our own personal stuff. And so Onion Flats architecture moved to the Boston area going on 3 years ago now. And it's pretty hard to get a foothold in a very different place. But we've really started to do some very interesting projects, really challenging projects in the primarily focused on deep energy retrofits. And I think maybe that was our only foothold into this area because nobody else wanted to touch it. It's just really difficult.
We all know it needs to happen, and yeah. If anybody will do it, it's those guys.
Kind of. That's how it. That's when RMI came to us 3 or 4 years ago and said, "We're starting this program called Realize, which is essentially modeled off after Energy Sprong, and we need somebody kind of like you that." Not just an architecture firm, not just a builder, not just understanding policy and the kind of the larger picture, but somebody that can kind of pull a team together to take this challenge on, find panelizers, find the right GCs and the right subcontractors, and put the right team together. And so they call us a solution provider. At least they did in 3 or 4 years ago when they asked. So it's taken that long to get some projects off the ground, and we're about to go into construction with 2 of them, and it's very interesting.
Awesome. Let's dive into that. Yeah. I just before that, I just to finally complete my
you haven't even finished your intro.
No, yeah, but you almost did. You did there with with RMI's perspective in terms of looking to you all as a solution provider. Is this not only this, not only that, not only this? That's my point. Is that you have all of these different. You're contributing to this transition in all these different ways, and which is very powerful. And inspiring. And I think we're all fortunate that you're doing the work. So thank you. And thanks for carving out some time to chat on the podcast about that.
So good.
It's awesome. So going into those projects you mentioned, and this is also a little bit of broader context for this conversation is it's part of this prefab series that we're doing. This is one of our final pieces kind of fleshing out prefab in high performance building, prefab and passive house. So with that, can you tell us about the projects that you're you're sinking
Yeah.
your teeth into.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, it requires a little bit of knowledge about the Energy Sprong program. I'm not sure
Yeah,
how much I need to
I
say about that,
I think we
but
should do a quick
yeah, just
primer.
really, yeah, really simply, um, the Dutch government, I don't know, what is it, 20, 30 years ago now, realized that they were going to have a lot of really poor performing housing stock. They needed a ton of new housing, and they needed to come up with a strategy to retrofit buildings without moving people out of them. Was effectively the principle. Like, how do you do that? How do you bring a building into what is essentially the passive house standard, retrofitting it without people moving out? And so they kind of encouraged the entire design and construction industry to come up with some strategy, some prefabricated strategies that would allow them to essentially drop an envelope, a high performance envelope around a building. They worked at that time with kind of small scale buildings, two stories. Um, and so they really motivated the industry to come up with some prefabricated strategies that would also potentially include mechanical systems, not just the high performance envelope. And within a couple of days, a building could be wrapped, and then the mechanical systems tied in, the old windows and doors pulled out, and without really interfering in people's lives. So that was the context for RMI's Realize program. And the first thing we asked them was, so there are different types of buildings, and there's the 5 stories and below, in some cases 6 stories and below, and 5 or 6 stories and above. Essentially, as it relates to the code, combustible and non-combustible buildings. So that immediately puts you into 2 different strategies: one that's wood-based and one that's non-combustible based.
Mm.
And so they said, yeah, you're right, and we've got to develop a strategy for both. And so RMI started really effectively putting a pipeline of developers together and projects together that they would help launch this initiative. And a bunch of developers were interested, but 2 kind of rose to the top. One is POA, Preservation of Affordable Housing. Many of you know
Yeah.
Julie Klump, who's a real passive house advocate, architect, and she's moving her company 100% in the direction of passive house, both new construction and retrofits. And they own buildings in like 12 states. So they're a really large company. And then a smaller scale developer outside of Boston called Alston Brighton CDC. And they've got a number of smaller scale 2 and 3 story buildings, 20 to 50 units. And they were both really, really excited about jumping into this. And so, long story short, we've got 2 projects, small scale wood framed retro DERs. We call them DERs, deep energy retrofits, that we're doing for Alston Brighton, and 6 to 9 projects that we're doing for POA, which is
Wow.
really exciting. But we're tackling one of those projects right now, and that's the non-combustible one versus the smaller scale wood framed combustible one for Alston Brighton. So in general, that's where we stand. Now there's a whole conversation about each one of those strategies that, depends on how much time you want here. If you've got like 24 hours, I can keep going.
All right, we can do a 24 episode series here.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so maybe we focus on a little bit the one with POA and what is the strategy? Like how are you? Are these offsite constructed panels that are being applied? How is that all working? And it is a very different, like you alluded to this, but Energy Sprong, my understanding is that really was the most typical building type was this very common row house
Yeah,
development style in the Netherlands, right? And so
true.
that so this is very different from that. So what I guess how is what are the challenges?
Yeah.
What are the lessons that you've been able to take from Energiesprong, and where have you really needed to strike out on your own and
Yeah.
re you know refigure solutions?
Yeah, it's a good question because Energy Sprong wasn't so much a guide for us as it
Hmm.
was for RMI, because RMI is more interested in policy and kind of larger systemic changes within the industry. And so they used, I think, the Energy Sprong model to do what they did with the mechanical industry. So, for instance, they funded some research to try to develop some compact heating, cooling, and ventilation systems that could kind of be tacked on to these projects. We weren't really involved in any of that, and frankly, I'm not sure where that work is right now. But when it
Hmm.
came to us, Energy Sprong was really it's really just the inspiration and the idea. Um, uh, their world is so different from a
Right.
construction industry, from a panelization industry than ours. We just kind of dove into the state of the prefabricated industry in the US. And so we did a bunch of research on panelizers, kind of multinational panelizers, national, local ones. And that was the first part of our project. It was really about research, and we identified about 9 different panelized companies, most of which were non-combustible. One in Canada, several in the U.S., a couple between the U.S. and Europe, and we did a bunch of things. We looked at the kind of technology of it all, the specific way in which it was built. We looked at the embodied carbon being used in each different one. We looked at the cost, was a huge concern. Um, and long story short, we arrived at a local, like literally in Cambridge,
Mm.
outside of Boston, neighborhood of Boston, local metal stud panelizing company that effectively transitioned that metal stud framing company into a panelized company. Right? It's kind of a great story. It's called Facade X. It's a great story because I think they saw exactly what RMI was trying to do, which was to develop interest in and scale. In it would be one thing if somebody came to them and said, "Hey, we've got this interesting idea for this project. Would you be interested in reconfiguring your factory to make this high performance envelope happen?" Nobody would do that. But with RMI's kind of strength behind them, and the idea of a pipeline of work combined with all of the policy changes that were being set in place in Massachusetts at the time, and that's a whole story in and
Yeah.
of
Right.
itself. I think they were beginning to see the writing on the wall and say, we should really explore this. And so we ended up with them from the perspective of local, hungry, eager, and cost. And it's been a with them. I think it's been a 2-year journey, and we're just getting down to um, uh, construction documents, and permits are going in the next few months. And it's been a real journey. I got to say, like they're just so. It's a really straightforward on the on the outside, a really straightforward system. It's a metal stud wall with a concrete, essentially cementitious based skin wrapped around high performance insulation, um, with windows in it.
Right.
And that's pretty straightforward way of saying it, but just the code issues associated with this, and we still have not gotten feedback from local code officials.
Mm.
We've got a really great team of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, code consultants, structural. So we've got an amazing GC. They're Haycon Construction, and the reason why we called them up was because they're entirely focused on passive house construction. They just finished a mass timber passive house apartment building, and yeah, you probably know of them in Boston. They're doing several more, and so they've got the mindset, they've got the interest, and they are on top of it. And so we're hitting a roadblock or 10 every
Right.
week that we just have to tackle, and we have to, there's no, just a simple example. There's no way for us to get a UL rating on a panel like this, right? Because it's a combination of a bunch of different materials that have never been put together. So how is a code official going to even look at this system? Well, through what's called EJs, engineering judgments. And personally, I've just learned about that whole process of getting an engineering judgment for a product that is yet to have the right certification, so that a code official can look at it and say, I can hang my hat on this.
So does an EJ come? Do you hire an engineer to do an EJ?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. But look, without getting into the weeds, unless you want me to, the point is, we've got a client that is clients are typically risk averse, right? We've got this amazing client that understands the risk and yet sees the promise. And so I want to say it's Julie, even though it's Poa, but it's really Julie. She is just a champion for this. And this wouldn't be happening without that kind of a client, without RMI, without all of the people on this team that know this is a really risky endeavor, and we're all going to succeed or fail in the process, and we've got to succeed.
Right.
So they own 4 buildings that were designed by the same architect, built by the same team in the same year, within 20 minutes of each other. So it's the exact same group of people. They all need to be retrofitted at the same time. So we're tackling one of those 4 buildings, and we're getting all the kinks worked out, and then we're going to replicate it on the other 3.
Right. So you mentioned 6 to 9 buildings for POA. So these are 4 of the 6 to 9.
4, and then she's got a whole bunch of projects that she wants us to look at.
Right. Now, I've heard a lot of talk about like 3D imaging as a really important first step. So that's part of your process then, is to image the building, understand where it's not, where right angles are not actually right angles and all that stuff.
What it's mostly about is windows, because if you think about it, the panel, call it a 20-foot, 12-foot panel, that has the new window has to align with the old window by like 1/4 of an inch max. Like you can't. And then let's say it's a 150-foot long wall, and you're off by 1/8 of an inch with each panel, right? That adds up over time. So it's really the registering between the windows and the panel that's essential. And we've tried 3 or 4 different companies and varying levels of accuracy. We've gone back to test and measure by hand, and sometimes it's less about the scan itself and more about the translation of the scan into a Revit model. So it's R&D. It's truly R&D, but it's a real project.
Yeah. Well, and people often talk about each project, any construction project, particularly site built, being kind of a prototype, right? We're
Yeah,
constantly building prototypes, and that makes it difficult for us to really realize cost savings over time sometimes, because each project is different. So that's part of the promise here, with potential promise with doing melding prefabrication with retrofit, right? I mean,
absolutely.
do you see that promise still now that you're in it here?
I do. I
Yeah.
do because, and I'm going to compare it to a different kind of prefab that I also have a lot of experience with, and that I don't see promise with, and
Mm-hmm.
that's modular.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think they're very different approaches to construction. I'll just say a couple of things about modular. I mean, I thought it was. I thought that's how we were going to be building buildings. 15, 20 years ago, when we actually started a modular company, unfortunately, and built a couple of projects, and it kind of worked. But more importantly, the system, the way of building seemed like a no brainer for building passive house, for building all kinds of different typologies. And what I learned throughout that process was something that I just could never have understood. And it's really the culture of building in this country just won't support it. I mean, that's what I've kind of come to believe in the end. It's the culture of uh, manufacturing the entire building into a volume in a factory rather than pieces of it on site. I think GCs want nothing to do with it because it essentially takes all their work away.
Right.
I think the transportation question, the infrastructure that we have for transportation has never really worked. I think the types of buildings that it does work for is about pumping out the absolute cheapest, fastest thing you can possibly do, which is a single family home in the suburbs somewhere. And so the idea of the complexity around stacking blocks of either non-combustible or combustible buildings, like 4 to 10 stories high, the industry just can't handle it. And there was the big debacle in Brooklyn, I don't know, 10 years ago. I won't even say the name, Forest City Redner, that the whole industry just kind of fell apart after that fell apart. And so modular culture isn't there in this country. Panelization, the culture's there because we do that. There are so many panelizers that just provide 2x4 walls with plywood on the outside of them to every builder I know.
Right.
Metal stud walls. They just totally fabricate every interior wall inside a massive commercial building. It's accepted. It's understood. It makes sense. And this kind of flat pack way of thinking about a building, for some reason, the U.S. Construction industry gets it, and they're doing it. So, for me, it's about what we're doing is not reinventing the wheel. We're actually working with the kind of fundamentals of what's already there. And if we can demonstrate, for instance, most of these panelizers, they don't install windows in these panels. That would be stupid. You're laying your panel down horizontally, and the glass is going to get broken. That's what everybody says. Well, when of course I've experienced the opposite. But that just takes time. It takes time to show people that no, in fact, you can not just put a window in, but you can put the exterior rigid insulation, which is also the fire rating for the entire system, on. So it can be rigid, it can be solid, it can be strong. And getting that envelope, that high performance envelope on the wall with fairly unskilled labor after that. Most panelizers, they don't do any of that. They just deliver their panels to the site and the GC lifts them up and puts them into place. So there's a leap between where the industry is now and where I think it needs to go. And these are the bridge. These projects, I think, are the bridge between those two.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. You mentioned the windows, for example, and
Yeah.
incorporating them into high performance panels. And I've heard you talk about, thinking that really is something that more and more panelizers should do. Could you talk about that and why?
Yeah. So the whole point of panelization, maybe this is a time to bring the panel up that just happened, because it was one of the points that I raised. I noticed that three out of the four teams were working with panelizers that weren't installing windows. And I just asked a simple question. I mean, it's not their fault. I just simply asked, why? The whole point of a passive house envelope being done in a factory is that you're not doing the most difficult part of the building, the envelope, out in the middle of rain, sleet, and snow, and you can train people to tackle all of the difficult issues that passive house tradesmen get taught for all the time. And so, how can you leave the window out of the equation? It's part of the most difficult part of a passive house envelope. And so it just doesn't make any sense to me. It makes sense in that from the transportation perspective, but that's solvable. I mean, it's been solvable. I've built 3 multifamily projects, a 49 unit, a 28 unit, and a 25 unit passive house multifamily project with panels that had windows, doors, weather resistant barrier, insulation, and air barrier built in.
Right.
It can be done. So I was just encouraging the architects on the panel as well as the panelizers themselves to just start incorporating this, because just think about it. You get the panel in, and then all of a sudden the really skilled labor is needed to fit the windows in the panel. We can do better.
Yeah, yeah, and I should say that when you're talking about the panel, you're talking about the panel about panels, which was at the Reimagine Buildings PREFAB conference on May 17th.
That's what I was
just
talking.
To clarify. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
geez.
It's
Yes,
a panel.
yes.
It's a panel.
The panel. Right.
Of
great point.
High performance designers and builders. Anyway, sorry.
The HPP. Yeah. I'll call it the HPP, the high performance panel.
That's good. And so another thing that came up that you just brought up that also Tessa Bradley, who is based in Olympia, Washington, and works with Collective Carpentry all the time, brought up was kind of this dynamic where now, because she's working with panels and she knows that the high performance qualities are sort of baked into those panels, that she can work with GCs that aren't familiar with doing passive house, so that allows her then to scale up her work, because the GCs that she knows and trusts are often very busy, or they work only in the Northwest and not in the new markets that she's getting into. So there's also all of that. Well,
and take it one step further. What does that mean? It means that passive house doesn't have to be this boutique way of thinking about building. Anybody, the framing crews that built those projects that I just mentioned of ours, they were given a 2-hour instruction on the field about how to slide them into place, put the sealant in the right place, and screw them together. I mean, very unskilled labor can make high performance buildings happen through panelization. Now that changes the thing that I care about the most, which is the scale of possibility here, because I just get exhausted by building one prototype
Yeah.
again and again and again. I'm done with prototypes. I just want scale to happen as quickly as possible. And there are all kinds of there are different approaches, right? I mean, think about this. Think about how not special this is. Every skyscraper, the envelope has been built that way for 20, 30 years. Like, are you kidding me? You're going to have scaffolding going up a 30-story skyscraper with people screwing material on the outside, putting insulation, putting zip panel, tape, and putting a window in it. No, it's, we have figured this out in the past. Now, those are panels that are complete from the outside. The panelization that I'm talking about right now, we still haven't even gotten to the point. Well, some panelizers have one called Dextal in New York City. They're trying to make the bridge between passive house and typical skyscraper buildings in New York City. So they've got a kind of gasketed solution where all of the finished materials can also be put on the outside of the panel. Right now, we're not working with that. We have to go back one more time and put the finished material on the outside.
Mm.
So, so it's just so possible. This is not brain surgery here.
Right. Right.
The industry knows how to do this. It's just a different part of the industry, and we need to kind of connect the two.
Yeah. No. So we just did asked our community what the single biggest challenge is to you, a community member, in creating low carbon buildings. We not just passive house, but the full gamut. And one of the things that comes up a lot, well, two things that come up a lot in terms of being the biggest challenges are lack of understanding or reluctance among builders and tradespeople who don't know about passive house, for example, to go there. So that's so that you're kind of dealing with resistance. And the other, of course, is the cost of doing better buildings.
Yeah.
So a couple of perennial challenges that we grapple with. I think we're making progress on it, but they're real. So what you're talking about with prefab panels helps to really deal with the first, potentially, that resistance from your GC that, hey, why are we doing this? This seems overboard or whatever. What about the cost? Like, what are you seeing on the cost front compared to the old way of doing things?
One of the best parts of this POA project is the fact that this one that's called Salem Fairweather that we're doing is literally next door to another project that they just completed called Salem Heights.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I know that one.
That project was done one window at a time, one piece of insulation panel at a time, one metal panel finished at it. It was a site-built deep energy retrofit. So my God, what a perfect example. Right next to us, right?
Apples to apples, yeah.
Mechanical systems, right? The mechanical systems that. So what were the differences between the two? With the first project, let's just deal with the mechanical systems. They chose a system that needed a closet on the inside of each unit. Mm-hmm. Now, immediately, just that move, that choice, that one choice meant everybody had to move out.
Yeah.
Now, if you're trying to take, and guess what it costs to move people out?
Right.
Over $1 million.
Oh man.
It costs over $1 million.
That makes sense.
So if all you do is rethink, you're not spending any more time or money. You're rethinking the mechanical strategy for a building that allows people to stay inside. That $1 million could go to the envelope, okay, or something else. All right, so that, and so in the end, we know exactly it's the best numbers we have on in terms of comparing. Now, it's a passive house project, right? So it's not passive house compared to a code built building, but it's a passive house retrofit site built. And
Yeah.
the goal of our project: keep people in the units, panelize it, see if it's less expensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And guess where we are? 20% less expensive.
Awesome.
In the
And
first shot.
that's on the first one too.
First one. Now look, these are all experiments, and
Yeah.
you never know. But our fingers were crossed, and the entire team was focused on hyper vigilant about every decision we made that would be cost effective, keep people in the units. Cost effective, keep people in the units. And so, it seems to be working. Now, that said, this is not cheap. But what we're finding is this: it is so. This is the biggest challenge is not so much the extra cost for passive house; it's the cost itself of retrofitting building.
Right. There's no way around it.
There's no way around it unless you knock them down and start from scratch.
Right.
And so part of our research and part of the work that we're doing is to say, okay, now, if we knocked this building down and started from scratch, what would the numbers be? And it turns out it's about twice. So for some reason, what we aren't doing enough of, and when I say we, I mean the building community, the passive house community, we should be pushing the issue, not the issue that deep energy retrofits are expensive.
Yeah.
Rather, that saving buildings is cheap.
That's an amazing way to frame it, and it makes so much sense.
Yes, like that. If you turn people's attention to the fact that you're saving it, you're spending half the amount of money instead of, oh my God, I got to put all this into this existing building. No, you're putting half of this into your existing building.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's exciting for us because we cut our teeth on new construction, and we don't have a lot of new construction going on right now. And not that I don't want to, I really want to, but these deep energy retrofits are really fun and they're necessary. And I haven't even talked about the wood frame stuff. All I'll say about the wood frame projects that we're doing is we're not panelizing much. And what's interesting about those is two things. On one project, the form, just the form, it's like this, it's almost like this Victorian architecture. I mean, crappy Victorian architecture. It's literally, these buildings are 18 years old that we're doing a deep energy retrofit on.
Oh my God.
18 years old.
What a crime.
And they've just got all this stuff sticking out of them, really just not really thought through very well as a building.
Yeah.
And so none of it, there's no building the same. There's no facade that's the same. Bay windows and roofs and eaves everywhere. So it makes no sense to panelize that kind of a project. And then the other project, 2 stories, but again, super complicated bay windows and a lot of ins and outs they're just row houses, but they're up against the property line. There are wires in the way. You can't have a panel being moved into place. So there are just logistical and typological reasons why these 2 are more challenging almost than the larger 6-scale project that we're doing. But we're getting just as creative with that too. And it's a lot more expensive than the 6-story one. A lot more.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's unnecessarily complicated in terms of building, the starting state. Yeah.
You got to work with what you've got.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amazing, Tim. I love this. Saving buildings is cheap. That's the new slogan.
There you go.
Let's start the movement, or you've started it.
No, come on. Again, this we stuff is really important
I
because
agree. I agree.
I have got to stop being the face of Onion Flats architecture.
Yeah, yeah,
Howard
yeah. No, I
Steinberg
appreciate
and
that.
everybody in our
Yep,
office
yep,
is actually doing the work. I'm
yeah,
just the
yeah,
mouthpiece.
yeah. No, no. All good. That's a great way to kind of bookend the
All right.
conversation, Tim. I appreciate your time. Thank you for
Yeah,
your work.
man.
Yeah, this has been
My
great, and
pleasure.
we got to do it again soon.
And that was Tim McDonald of, he's Onion Flats officially, but I feel like Tim McDonald is of lots of places, Zach. He's around.
He is around. He moderated a panel discussion in hour 2 of Reimagine Buildings PREFAB, which was fantastic. I also just saw him down in Austin. He did a bunch of moderation as Dan Whitmore and I were emceeing the conference. So he is around, and as I think my intro to him alluded to, he's had a major impact on the growth of Passive House in North America, both through the example of his work, but also the policy progress that he got enacted in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So yeah, he's also a super fun guy.
Well, he's a fun guy, but he's also a very modest guy, as is common for very.
That's right.
I guess a lot of great leaders is that they are very enthusiastic to try and spread the acknowledgements around, and Tim, right from the top, he very determined to say that there are lots of people have been involved, and I think that's true. He has also been a leader himself, but it's great to acknowledge the rest of the team at Onion Flats, but also all the other people that have been involved. And Tim talked about all these other great companies and organisations that are assisting the whole industry to move towards panelisation and affordable ways of providing high performance housing. And I get the sense that that's one of Tim's superpowers. It's not just his vision as a designer and what he does in his day job, but connecting all those pieces and trying to move everyone along to overcome challenges together for delivery, which seems to be a bit of a theme for the whole prefab scene at the moment. There's a lot of it makes a lot of sense at so many levels, but there's also some problems of like different things you got to think about with transport and different size cranes and how the connections work and are systems compatible with each other and all these sort of details, which I kind of get the feeling that's where the industry is at the moment, is sorting through some of those details.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's, in terms of Tim's superpowers, I think that one of them is really taking time to understand the problem and, and really diagnosing the problem and then thinking about so how can we leverage the most impact and with to solve that problem or to navigate around it or and so things like I think that was true. It's certainly true on the policy front with the whole low-income housing tax credit stuff with the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. But in terms of specifically around prefab, I think that his understanding of the construction industry and the construction culture, and so that and his move toward panelization as a prefab solution that meshes with his understanding of what builders are willing to do, what will actually support GCs in their work. I think speaks to that sort of like analysis that he brings to it. That is what we need.
I think a good example of that was the windows and putting windows in and acknowledging that's the hard part of doing a building correctly. And it's interesting because that's definitely where we're at this part of the world. I know a few panel manufacturers who don't install windows in the factory.
Yeah, no.
Because
totally.
Right. Because they're like, oh, that's hard. Yeah, we're going to do that.
Right.
And Tim's point is, that's the hard part.
That's exactly why.
That's why you should be doing it in controlled conditions in site. And then I think some people are starting to come around to this. Darren, that we spoke to last week, has started to install windows. And because I asked him about what about transport, and he said, well, the safest way to transport a window is packaged in a wall, which is going to hold it really, really well. And it's like, that's a good point, because otherwise you have to put all this packing around the window to take care of it while you're transporting. So that packing may as well be the wall that it's going to be attached to for the rest of its useful life.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, that actually came up in the prefab, the Friday event. He it was a great panel of with lots of mutual respect, and so he was kind of ribbing some of the manufacturer folks who were on there. Hey, come on, why don't we do the windows?
Right,
come on,
right.
Yeah,
and there are reasons for that, right?
It's a good point.
It's a big change. Like, it makes the panel much heavier. It probably makes it wider. It's got more. You can't just lay them flat on top of each other on the back of a truck. So there are reasons that it's a challenge, but it takes someone stepping back and saying, hey, what's the bigger picture here?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess lots of really cool stuff. Some great projects there. I think we should put some links in specifically to POA, which Tim talked about, but also Facades X looks like a pretty... how would you describe Facades X? Is it a company? Is it what is it? A network?
Yeah. No, that's I'm becoming familiar with Facades X, but I think what's cool about Facades X is that it's a local, that they're working with a local manufacturer who has been very responsive to the needs of this building, understanding that there are also, as he mentioned, 6 to 9 others just with POA in the region that they want to do. Yeah. But Facades X is creating the panels for the project. I want to just highlight two money things, like the cost observations that he's had with the Mayweather project. So the first being that we have 2 side-by-side deep energy retrofits going to past house levels of performance, and one that is not prefab panelized and one that is, and the one that is looks like it's 20% less expensive. And the other one was just, his brilliant reframing of the question of the cost of deep energy retrofits. Yeah. And I needed to hear this, honestly, because I feel sometimes it feels really daunting, but the reframing of it to saving the idea that saving buildings is cheap. So that this project is 50% less than scraping the building and creating a new one. That's a message that I think we can be much better at sharing out there with the world. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking a lot at the moment about the fact that buildings are expensive. Building a building is expensive, regardless of how well it performs. Yeah, and it so often gets pointed to, what's the extra of doing passive house, or what's the extra of trying to go low carbon? You've got to have all these extra. It's going to cost more, and people are kind of missing the point that it's the building that's expensive. The timber, the glass, the concrete, the steel, that you're going to have to buy all that stuff anyway. So why would you not want to make sure that it's put to the best use? You're going to have to make that investment just because you're making a building anyway. Doing passive house, doing any sort of high performance just means that you're allocating those resources in the best possible way. And doesn't have to be any more expensive. Sure, it might be. You might be paying a slightly higher premium because you're getting a far better outcome. But I think reframing the expense as just being a natural part of design and building, not high performance necessarily. But this takes that one step further and say, into the sort of retrofit space and say, doing high performance or doing a deep retrofit. Sure, it's an investment, but it's nowhere near the cost of rebuilding a whole new building. So the bottom line there is that passive house doesn't have to be expensive. It's not the expensive bit of building, and saving buildings is cheap. Saving any saving that you can do on an existing building. I guess there's some limits to that. Often you have to do a lot of rework, and there are some problems which you also talked about with Tim. The fact that when you're doing reclads, nothing's straight, so you can have these perfectly designed and constructed elements that to a very high tolerance in a factory, but there is the additional element of having to make things fit onto an existing structure, which is not going to be square, in the real world. There's challenges there, but as a general rule, that's a really good point to value what we already have.
Yeah, the kind of general wisdom around deep energy retrofits and making them economical is to time them with this natural cycle of capital expenditures, so that when you have to do it right, that whole thing. So that this idea of saving buildings is cheap is a simple, powerful way of saying that. Because it's at that moment when the building needs to be saved, when it's become obsolete, it no longer is keeping people healthy and comfortable, or it needs to be either revived or replaced. That's when you can save it, and that's the moment that passive house is the cheap option.
Yeah.
So it's great stuff.
Awesome. Very good stuff. And always great to hear from Tim. So thank you for taking the time to have that chat.
It was fun. Yeah.
And well done again for the events. But events aren't stopping, I'm guessing. What have we got coming up?
This Wednesday we have a episode of Passive House Accelerator live with Andrew Peel of Peel Passive House Consulting, and he is going to be presenting a construction tech episode of the show entitled "A New Approach to Cold Air Distribution." So stay tuned for that, or join us for that. It's going to be great.
Awesome. And a bunch of other stuff going on in Passive House world as well. Of course, we've got the Thrive happening down in Australia this week. Hoping to get some reports out of that soon as well. So lots going on. Check out the newsletter. Sign up if you're not already subscribed to that. And we'll see you back again next week on Passive House Podcast.